If you followed my work for many years, you'll know that I'm very cold on the news. Probably for a decade now. Even when I was doing stand-up comedy all that time ago, I've been critical of the way in which we get and consume the news because most of the news that we consume is a product. The incentives for the people to produce it are to continue producing it and to get as many people as possible to look at whatever it is. Like, this is all well covered now, well in the discourse, and we understand why that's a problem. But perhaps the worst thing about it is that you lose a sense of what's commensurately worth your time or what's commensurately important to your life. And I've been reflecting over the last couple of weeks in particular how little effort is given to some very important things and how much effort is given to some less important things. And I mean, that's a constant thing to bemoan for people who have a particular issue that they wish was out in the public, or people who are shocked at how discourse generally tends to go in society. There's nothing new there. But particularly with the Epstein files, and now the transition from caring about that to the Iranian war, which has been shocking, by the way. It's something like a 95% drop off in interest in the Epstein files. It does feel like everything's kind of happening at once. I mean, it already feels like many cycles ago that America unilaterally went in and just kidnapped the president of Venezuela. And so it could be hard to follow all the moving stories that are happening simultaneously. And that's the other downside of news. So on the one hand, the lost proportionate sense of what's important means that you can be closely following something like a new pope or a royal funeral or a coup amongst the Labour leadership or whatever it might be. You can get fractal and infinite details in things that are ultimately going to be pretty bounded and not that important and going to be able to be explained in one sentence in a few weeks. But then on the other hand, you can miss the biggest things that happen over life that just go unreported upon. And I've talked about these a lot in the past, like the striking ones are young people not having any sex, young men in particular, the total degradation of our ecosystems and the growing immiseration of people and kind of pandemic levels of prescribed medications for quote unquote mental issues. Those things are really important and often don't touch the news at all. But there are things that also touch the news, but in small ways that if you blink, you miss them, but they're very important. But as Lenin is claimed to have said, but he almost certainly didn't say it, there are decades in which nothing happens and then weeks in which everything happens. And maybe we're in one of those periods, maybe we're not. That's not really the subject of today's video. Instead, I just think that there were a few things that have occurred in the past month or so that if they'd occurred at almost any other point in my life, with the exception of perhaps September 11, that would be earthquake, jaw drop news. And so I feel the heavy burden of moral responsibility to forward this onto you as something that might be interesting. If you're a fan of the podcast and you enjoy following it, thank you so much for listening. I keep being cyberbullied by Spotify, who tell me that for the high number of listeners that I have a very small number of subscribers. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment just to jump over to Spotify, or if you're not there already, and giving a follow of the podcast, that'd be great. And if you want to support the show more, the best thing you can do is to enjoy it. But the second best thing you can do is tell a friend, send them an episode that they might like. And if those two options disgust you, or you've already discharged your responsibility, the third best thing you can do is join up as a Patreon patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Endrey, Endrey. And I want to say thank you so much to Maisie Lyon, who's upped her subscription from a casual to committed. Wow. Great stuff, Maisie. This episode's for you. Hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to the Chris Endrey Podcast. As I said, we're getting stuck into some things that have slipped off the radar, or perhaps didn't breach into consciousness that are worth a look. There's a reason that governments, take out the trash on a Friday afternoon or on New Year's Eve or a Melbourne Cup or Grand Final day or whatever it might be. And it's because they know that if you've got bad news to give, the fewer people listening or the more occupied people are, the less damage to you for giving it. And I'm not going to say that they're related. Obviously, the way in which the Epstein files, which were generating a huge amount of heat, have subsided, have been relegated to the back burner, and now with the Iran war is a great example of that. But just because America and Israel have decided to kill an Ayatollah and many thousands of other people and explode a bunch of stuff, and Iran retaliating by blowing up all of the Gulf, that doesn't mean that there aren't still interesting things happening elsewhere that are worth looking at. And so here's the first story that has not been entirely buried, but I suspect we may hear more about it as time goes on. But you may have missed it. Last week, Congressman Ted Lieu, who's a Democrat, gave the following statement to the press. Why are Republicans so interested in Bill and Hillary Clinton? It's because they're trying to distract from the fact that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files thousands and thousands of times. In those files, there's highly disturbing allegations of Donald Trump raping children, of Donald Trump threatening to kill children. And he's right. That's all been in there. If you've been looking at them closely or even not that closely, you may have seen that that's the case. And I've gone through and read them myself as well. And it's certainly surprising to me that it hasn't gained more traction, this information, because the FBI in their investigations obviously deemed it credible enough to pursue multiple interviews. And in fact, in the final interview with one of the accusers who alleges that she was sexually assaulted by Donald Trump when she was 13 and Jeffrey Epstein as well, the transcript has her as hesitant because she's an adult by this time. And she says she understands that the statute of limitations may have expired and what's the point of even doing it, but she's still encouraged to go ahead and give her statement. And it's worth noting that these were some of the documents that were quietly deleted by the Department of Justice, and they are ones that were withheld by the Department of Justice. And they are ones with which FBI Director Kash Patel had fully available to him when he sat before Congress and declared that there was no information, evidence of co-conspirators or information that they should be having to prosecute other people. And Pam Bondi, similar claims. At the very least, you would think that this would be front page news in every paper in the world. I mean, it really illustrates kind of how far our expectations have fallen and how low our accountability has become. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, if a minister oversaw a project that went badly, it was the expectation that they would resign. Former President Nixon, he resigned off the scandal of Watergate. Impeachment motions were brought before him, but he resigned before they went ahead. But they were on the count of just covering up his role in that. And here we have an accusation of a very strong crime with a very visible line of an active cover up. And the consequences are yet to come in at all. So is it the case that this is kind of just squeezed off of the front pages because of all that's happening with the catastrophe in Iran? Yes, plausibly so. But this one, at least, I don't believe we've heard the last of. Another fairly shocking headline that came out this week, which you may not have seen, OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, by everybody's coldest psychopath, Sam Altman, their robotics leader resigned over concerns about surveillance and autonomous weapons in an OpenAI contract with the Pentagon. It's obviously a hot button issue, the usage of AI in targeting, and as we have increasing reliance upon drones and just generally autonomous methods of delivering arms and surveillance. You know, this is a very fast moving space that I intend to do an episode on in the coming weeks. But despite having a career in this, Caitlin Kalinowski, who oversaw the hardware at OpenAI, has resigned and not with malice to the organization, but she's issued a statement and I'll read some of it for you. I resigned from OpenAI. I cared deeply about the robotics team and the work we built together. This wasn't an easy call. AI has an important role in national security, no doubt. But surveillance of Americans without judicial oversight and lethal autonomy without human authorization are lines that deserved more deliberation than they got. This was about principle, not people. I have deep respect for Sam and the team, and I'm proud of what we built together. So she's not leaving, burning down bridges in all directions. I'm just going to read what I think is a salient bit to you again. But surveillance of Americans without judicial oversight, so that's a crime, and lethal autonomy without human authorization are lines that deserved more deliberation than they got. So we know that in existing conflicts, most notably in the limited reading I've been doing, the Israel war on Gaza, that AI systems have been implemented for years now to help with targeting, to offer targets to say, oh, here's this person, or here's this building, or here's this type of vehicle, or whatever. Do you want to kill it? And then somebody will spend 20 seconds, which is the account that I read, saying yes or no. And I guess from what Caitlin's asserting here, we can deduce that part of the OpenAI contract with the Pentagon and what they're developing involves getting rid of that 20 seconds, getting rid of that personal authorization at all, and just having AI systems determine targets and go out and explode things, which is really nightmarish stuff. It's next level. I mean, you know, if you're a tech absolutist, you might think that this type of thing is inevitable and going to happen anyway, but you would think it would be the type of thing that would happen with a little bit more conversation, given the obvious, inevitable, horrifying endpoints that this stuff could lead towards. And it makes me wonder if that strike upon the Iranian schoolgirls did come about from one of these errors. I mean, even I'm not cynical enough to think that they would have intentionally targeted a school as their move to open the war. But it is easy to see how there could be some mapping error or some classification error that could have an AI system identify a target and have preemptive approval to escalate it to bombing or something like that. I don't know. I'm not in there. All that stuff would be extremely classified, obviously. But if the very people who are paid very well and professionally incentivized and aligned around pursuing these sorts of goals has resigned on ethical grounds, then I think there's obvious cause for concern, particularly given how rabidly militant the current Secretary of War, Peter Hegseth, seems to be. I mean, he's out there kind of daily making statements on how we will not hold back and, we're going to bring them death from the sky. That's what they're getting. The foolish Iranians who think they're going to live, this message is for you. Like it's cartoon stuff. And knowing that could be backed up by incredible capabilities that have no moral framework as well should be a cause for concern and maybe a little canary in the mine shaft that we'll come back to in the coming years as more potentially horrible things continue to inevitably happen. And I should say that she's not the only resignation that's occurred in this space. There are dozens now of AI experts sounding the alarm bell on all sorts of frontiers related to security and morality. And perhaps that's something that we could go into in another week. But for now, I'll limit it to that and just leave it with you as a little something to prepare your body for, knowing that the drones that are going to bring you burgers in the future might also be coming with grenades and cameras to film the inside of your house and eliminate a bomb that you got sitting in the garage or whatever. All right, another big one that seems to have been going under everybody's radar is that Israel invaded southern Lebanon this week. I mean, they've been attacking them for the last 18 months anyway, but they've made a declaration that people up to the river have to evacuate, and this has displaced 700,000 people, including 200,000 children, and that's the UN's own assessment. Did you hear, I barely heard anything about this. It seems like the type of thing in a normal time of calm waters, that would be your front page news. Israel invades Lebanon. But it's kind of in the midst of everything else, just another footnote. But that surely won't be the end of that story. 700,000 people on the move is a lot. That will have its own consequences. Who knows how, and who knows what the responses will be from the Lebanese state, from Hezbollah, of course. There's another war in a region with so many conflicts that it's kind of hard for any human to process. And talking about these things, I get that they're horrible, but they are also reality, and you need to reckon with reality in order to make good decisions. Because I clocked at the Australian Parliament this week. There's been conversation around the destruction of a cemetery with the graves of Anzacs that's been maintained for the last century, that's been bulldozed in part, and for sure that is terrible and worth looking at and discussing. But it's kind of akin to being upset that the Unabomber was using the incorrect amount of postage stamps or something like that. There's a bigger story occurring at the moment in this region right now affecting real people at a much graver scale. And I get that it's the Australian Parliament's mandate to talk about things that impact Australians. But how many Australian Lebanese people are there? They'd all have families that are impacted by this. How many Australian Israeli families are there that are impacted by this? It's kind of why I do this episode and like to give attention to things that I think is deserved commensurately, because, as the gurus would say, where attention flows, the energy goes. If we hope to aspire to a peaceable world, then we need to properly understand what's occurring at a very baseline so that we know what problems we're trying to deal with. And I would contend that war is a higher priority problem than most, obviously. And on exactly that, it's not an easy time to oppose war for many. Talk about it a bit, but one marker of how society's changed is when the Iraq war started. There were wall-to-wall protests of people in the West not wanting to be involved. The streets were full of no war rallies. Yet I think it's pretty clear that the Iran war that America and Israel are waging now is even less popular in America than the Iraq war was. And yet there isn't the same kind of rallying call of people in the street. People are just occupied in different ways, and the way in which we express our energy is a lot less physical and public than it used to be, obviously. But one guy who is happy to express his opposition publicly is a Marine veteran, Brian McGuinness, who disrupted a Senate hearing over Israel policy, and he was forcibly removed because he kept yelling out, "No one wants to fight for Israel. Americans don't want to fight for Israel. No one wants to die for Israel." And he was grabbed by the police and dragged out, as you would expect. But a senator jumped in on the extraction, a Republican senator. His name is Tim Shee. And you can see the video of this. Don't watch it if you're a bit squeamish, but they grab him, drag him. He grabs the door to keep yelling his message. No one wants to fight for Israel. And the senator is involved in pulling him and breaking his arm. And I just thought, don't you think that senator breaks Marine's arm would be bigger news. Again, this is less than a week ago, but it hasn't really done the rounds. And again, I understand it's because there are bigger things occurring. But what an innocent time it was when Egg Boy smashed the egg on Senator Fraser Anning, and then Fraser Anning, physically responded, and that was the news everywhere. We all know about Egg Boy, but heroic as Egg Boy was, and interesting as that stoush was, surely it's not as interesting as a senator breaking the arm of a former serviceman who's making a very strong political declaration that's explicit. But yes, seems to have slipped through. I hope you're interested in that story. Another important one that's emerging that is one of those things that could end up being very impactful is that the Polish president, Nawrocki, he's called for Poland to have nuclear weapons. And he hasn't been clear on whether that's having their own nuclear program or doing it under the auspices of another nuclear power in the region that isn't the US. But this kind of nuclear proliferation expressed so casually by leaders of countries is something that I think is worth being very aware of, and I think is very newsworthy. The irony of the times is not lost on me that America and Israel have exploded the entire leadership of Iran and are carpet bombing Tehran under the very flimsy claim that they're close to developing nuclear weapons, which by the USA's own assessments isn't true, following on from Tulsi Gabbard's speech to the Director of National Intelligence last year. But Poland are not alone in this in Europe. Poland, Sweden, and Germany have all expressed an interest in having some sort of nuclear capability. And it's all being done, of course, in response to the renewal of war on the continent with Russia invading Ukraine. But these countries are signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I guess there's no consequence for them talking about these things, certainly no social consequence that I've seen. As I always like to talk about with nuclear weapons, I mean, a car is something that breaks down, more than your kitchen fork, because a car has lots of moving parts and they're interacting in a dynamic way that can be a bit chaotic. You only need something small to go wrong for everything to go wrong. And that's the same with the nuclear system. We can't have a large number of countries having a large number of nuclear systems without exponentially increasing the risk that something will go wrong. And we know what the consequences are if things go wrong. And so to casually invite that, I mean, there's a reason we have international treaties and there's a reason we have international movements against this, because we've become very close in the past, not just politically, but mechanically through mistakes, to having full nuclear exchanges. And, no one wins those wars. No one wins any war, but especially nobody wins a nuclear war. And I think it's especially indicative of the times that we're in that, Germany, who just a few generations ago lost an extremely aggressive war for which they were heavily punished, and Sweden, who were ostensibly neutral for almost all my life, that they're discussing nuclear capabilities. Yeah, it's something to watch and news that I would like to bring to your attention. This next one was quite shocking to me. Again, not because it's so unbelievable, but because it would, to me, seem to be the type of thing that should come with grave consequence and has come with seemingly no consequence. And that is, here's the headline: MI5, British Secret Intelligence, had an office at BBC headquarters in London that was used to vet new staff. I mean, maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think it's the type of thing that calls into question the kind of core things of our society. Because if we're a democratic society and we have a government, and to vote in that government, we need information. And to ensure that people have good information, we pay for a public broadcaster. If that public broadcaster is significantly influenced by any arm of government, let alone a secretive arm of government, in what it does, then it opens a pretty strong feedback loophole whereby which kind of the worst kinds of tyranny and excesses and whatever can occur and be protected. And I'm not saying that that's what's happened in the UK yet. And there are people that would mount that case. I'm not one of them. I don't know enough about it. But it is, if nothing else, I think very concerning, because one of the functions of the public broadcaster at times will be to hold to account organizations like MI5. And if they're determining who gets to be, in a sense, their own auditors, then, I mean, let's just say that if I was determining who was writing all the reviews of my gigs, I'm not going to pick people that I know don't like me, or I'm not going to pick people that are volatile, or I'm not going to pick people that are kind of anything other than going to be positive for me. And maybe that's too much of a rosy assessment of what the purpose of a public broadcaster is, but I would think that the mask falling off so much that we could see that MI5 would have an office choosing who gets to be hired or not would be the type of thing that should be, at the very least, a grave legitimacy and reputational threat to that particular public broadcaster. But I mean, I think if that occurs in Britain, you can assume that the same type of thing has been occurring in Australia, the US, such as they have public broadcasting, it's more the funding sources, probably even easier to do over there as a censorship move. And it reminded me of another story that came out this year that I'll also bring to your attention, is that the chief of Middle Eastern reporting, the Middle East desk in BBC, a guy called Rafi Berg, is himself an ex-CIA employee, like self-declared for a CIA cutout, and describes himself as a former Mossad collaborator. And he has hanging on the wall of his office praise from Netanyahu. You would think that that type of thing might disqualify you from being the arbiter of certain news that we get to hear, particularly from a public broadcaster. And it's not even the specifics. Like, I know that people live a rich life and you can work for CIA and you can be an agent of Mossad and then go on and do other things. Like, I'm not even the type of person to tar someone's entire life as, what you think in your 20s is what you think in your 50s. I'm sure it's true for basically nobody. But I think just as a litmus test, you wouldn't expect to take seriously the reporting of a journalist who had a framed photo of Putin above their desk and they had the responsibility for covering the Russia-Ukraine war. Like, you would think, oh, that person is biased in a way that is unreasonable with our chart of operations. So no, that's you can go out and look all this up. It's all public information. And I think that it's information that should be extra scrutinized at a time where we do have a very blatant, illegal, in as much as such things exist, war being conducted by Israel and America in the Middle East, that the public support for or otherwise, which is meted out and determined largely through the information sources that we get. And the BBC is the world's largest broadcast news organization, both in terms of its staff and in terms of its reach. So you would think a big compromise like that, being public information, would be noteworthy. Well, it's not something I'm ready on the normal masthead, so I bring it to you so that you may go out and make your own assessments about what is and isn't credible information, and also your assessments about how to structure the hierarchy of information that you get in society and just how things operate. Curious. If nothing else, I hope that's interesting. So thanks for listening to my quick around the grounds update of news that I think is worth catching on to that you may have missed. Thank you for your forbearance for me to do these episodes off of the topics that I flagged I would do. I just think when things are of outlier interest and impact, that they're obviously worth discussing here in this space. But I am endeavoring to get back onto the program of all of the topics that I had flagged. Hopefully we can have a few. Hopefully the war wraps up in a week and everything could cool down. Hot tip, it's going to get worse, my prediction. But if that's the case, I'll try and do extra episodes to cover that sort of stuff, as I have been doing with the Epstein files. So if you are a patron, jump over to patreon.com and have a listen. I've done 2 episodes now, and we'll do a third this week on the Epstein files. I'm kind of looking at the ones that are maybe interesting that people may have missed, or at least ones that I think form kind of the most compelling pixels into what the overall picture is of what is revealed by the uncovering of that world. Because it's super interesting, and I'm going to keep reading them and coming across more things, even though by my own reporting, it's 90% less fashionable than it was a few weeks ago. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode. I can't tell you how lovely it is to have this space. Yes, if you like it, please thumbs up, subscribe, share a link with your friend. There's a lot more that I want to do, and the more of us there are on board, the easier it is to do it. All the best to you wherever you are, and have a safe, peaceful day.